The final night before the harvest arrived with a heavy, suffocating stillness. They didn't take us to the hall for the end, not yet. Instead, they dragged Kim and me to the center of the village, stripping us and forcing us into 2 wooden crates identical to the one that had held Sarah. The ritual was a slow, agonizing baptism. They poured the same rancid slurry of rotten meat and cold, viscous blood over us, the thick liquid matting our hair and filling our nostrils with the stench of a shallow grave. The tall man, the elder of this hollowed-out place, stepped forward. He reached into my crate, his cold, spindly fingers tracing the line of my spine until they hit the cluster of weeping indentations. I shivered, the trypophobic revulsion peaking as he pressed a thumb into the center hole. "He carries the mark now," the elder whispered, his voice a dry rasp of satisfaction. "The root has claimed the marrow. He is one of the fold." He turned his bulging, amber eyes toward Kim, who was shaking so violently the wooden crate rattled against the mud. His expression shifted to one of cold, clinical dismissal. The girl, however, remains untainted. The forest rejects the stone. She will be the tithe for tomorrow's moon. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I was being kept as a witness, or perhaps a new drone for their empty chores, while Kim was destined for the well. They led us, still dripping and fouled, into the large prayer hall at the stroke of midnight to begin the vigil. The horror inside was absolute. Hundreds of necrotic masses, the ancestors of the village, were fused to the pews, their gray flesh entwined with thick, pulsing roots that disappeared into the floorboards. As we were led down the aisle, the air vibrating with a low, occult chanting, I saw one of the masses twitch, a pale arm reaching out from a cluster of shelf mushrooms. Kim collapsed. She didn't fight. She simply curled into a fetal pose on the cold wood, covering her eyes and sobbing a broken, rhythmic sound of total defeat. I knelt beside her, my mind fractured by the grief of losing Sam and John, but the elder's words, one of the fold, ignited a desperate, white-hot spark of human spite. I had spent my chores preparing for this. While they thought the forest was my prison, I had confirmed that John's final act wasn't in vain. He had cleared the engine intake of the GMC and hacked away the primary vines before the beast took him. I didn't wait for the morning sun. I slowly hacked away at the vines and roots near the tangled RV as best as I could, and then, while the villagers were lost in their deep, groaning moans of prayer, their eyes fixed on the altar, I reached for the heavy brass lamp hanging precariously near our bench. With a silent prayer to the friends we'd lost, I stood and hurled the lamp with everything I had into the center of the dry, moss-infection-choked pews. The explosion of fire was instantaneous. The prayer hall transformed into a chimney of screaming, orange death. The rooted masses began to whistle and shriek as the flames took hold of their fungal bodies, the smell of melting fat and burning moss filling the air. The villagers erupted in a panicked, ancient wail, their courtly facade shattering into spindly chaos. I grabbed Kim by the hood of her sweat-soaked jacket, hauling her upright. She was a shell, staring blankly at the inferno, but I shoved her toward the exit. We bolted through the iron-barred doors, the heat at our backs reaching out like a physical hand. Wes sprinted for the RV. The RV sat steaming in the dark, the few vines remaining on its frame shriveling as I doused them with the fuel canister John had hidden. I threw Kim into the seat and jammed the key into the ignition, my fingers fumbling against the strange, hard holes in my skin. "Come on," I hissed, my voice cracking as I twisted the key. The engine groaned, a hollow, metallic hacking that felt like it was coming from my own chest. It coughed and spat a thick, oily black smoke that clouded the windshield. Behind us, the prayer hall had become a roaring furnace. The tall man was a silhouette of dancing orange flames on the porch, his screams high and thin against the roar of the fire. The rest of the village had shattered. Some of the spindly figures stood frozen, let out hysterical, rhythmic wails at the sight of their burning ancestors, while others turned toward us with a sudden, jerky predatory focus. They began to run. Their long, elongated limbs moved with a terrifying, spider-like speed, their boots thudding against the mud in a frantic beat. I fumbled with the ignition again, Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the elder. He wasn't running. He stood amidst the chaos, his bulging amber eyes locked onto mine with a cold, piercing intensity. As he stared, I felt a sharp, agonizing throb in my back. The small holes between my shoulder blades seemed to burrow deeper, a wet, wriggling sensation as if something was trying to anchor itself into my spine. It felt like 1,000 needles were being pushed into my marrow, a trypophobic nightmare pulsing in time with the flickering flames. I didn't care. The pain was nothing compared to the hollow weight in my gut. I looked at the passenger seat where Kim sat, her face a mask of gray stone, and then back at the mud where they had pulverized Sam. I had to get us out. The engine sputtered one last time, and then roared to life. A jagged, mechanical scream that tore through the supernatural silence of the woods. I slammed the shifter into gear and floored the pedal. The tires spun wildly, throwing up massive plumes of black mud that coated the reaching hands of the villagers as they closed in. The old motorhome lurched forward, its frame rattling as if it were about to shake itself apart. We tore away from the clearing, the firelight fading into a dim orange glow in the rearview mirror. I left the harvest, the village, and the mark behind in the smoke, driving blindly into the black wall of the forest. The reprieve was short-lived. A sudden, earth-shaking impact rocked the chassis, the sound of shrieking metal echoing through the cab. The keeper monster had burst from the tree line, slamming its massive bulk directly into our side. If we hadn't been in such a heavy, wide-frame vehicle, the force would have flipped us like a toy. I white-knuckled the steering wheel, fighting to keep the tires on the narrow dirt path. The road here was elevated, a precarious strip of earth hemmed in by dense trunks and ancient vines that clawed at the windows. I floored it, the engine bellowing out thick clouds of black smoke as it strained against the mud and the weight of the beast. Beside me, Kim was hyperventilating, her breath coming in jagged, panicked hitches as she stared at the darkness outside. I was on autopilot, my mind a numb void. The monster moved with a terrifying, fluid grace, weaving left and right through the timber, using massive fallen trunks like clubs to batter the side of the RV. Every hit felt like it was going to cave the walls in. Then, through the cracked windshield, I saw it, the transition. The tangled, vein-like mess of the old dirt road began to give way to the cracked asphalt of the original route we had taken before the forest swallowed us. The assault stopped as suddenly as it had begun. I could hear the heavy, wet thud of the creature's retreat into the undergrowth. I let out a long, shuddering breath as we reached the clearing where John had moved the log only a lifetime ago. The RV was a wreck, the exterior beaten and scarred, but it was still moving. But just as the shadows of the deep woods began to recede, that sickly, crackling laugh tore through the air one last time. It wasn't the sound of one throat. It was a raspy, discordant chorus of 1,000 men and women, a haunting overlap of voices that seemed to vibrate directly in my skull. "You will never leave, Ben." The chorus let out that groaning moan again, vibrating deep within me as it chilled the blood in my veins. "You belong to the forest, you belong to us." I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just kept my eyes on the road ahead, the itching holes in my back throbbing in a slow, rhythmic pulse as we fled toward a world that no longer felt like it belonged to us. The asphalt of the new road 234 felt like a miracle beneath the tires, a smooth ribbon of sanity that shouldn't have existed after the hell we'd crawled through. We crossed the main gate where that cursed dirt split had first lured us away, the gate John had opened with such hope in his eyes. John, Sam, oh God, why did it have to be them? The silence in the cab was a screaming thing, filled with the ghosts of their voices and the phantom heat of the fire we'd left behind. We were out. We had to be. We had made it past the beast, past the impact, and into the light. Kim finally spoke, her voice a thin, brittle reed that barely sounded human. "Did we escape, Ben? Or are we still back at the village?" I turned to look at her, a comfort dying on my lips. Her eyes didn't meet mine. They were dark, hollow voids that seemed to sink back into her skull. As I watched, the air in the cab grew stagnant and thick with the smell of wet earth. Small, perfectly circular holes began to pucker across her cheeks and forehead, the skin around them gray and parchment thin. Her smile widened, a slow, agonizing stretch of muscle that reached too far, mimicking that moss-fringed grin from the forest. "Ben," she whispered, but the voice wasn't hers. It was the chorus of the thousand. The world buckled. The dashboard melted into rotting bark, and the steering wheel turned into a writhing mass of slick, purple muscle. I tried to scream, but my throat was packed with dry moss. I woke up, but not into my body. I was a sensation of heat and weight, fused into a suffocating mass of necrotic flesh. I was a tapestry of fused limbs, many and yet none. I could feel my own hands, my real hands, clawing desperately at the translucent, sickly skin from the inside. I was trying to tear my way out of the meat, to rip through the cage of this gargantuan, walking nightmare. I pushed against the necrotizing walls of my own prison, my fingers finding purchase in the raw, dark meat of the beast's chest. I almost had it. I could feel the cold night air on my knuckles as I breached the surface. But as I lunged toward the light, a deep, agonizing pull dragged me back in. It wasn't my pain. It was the collective, thrumming agony of 100 others, the scream of 1,000 men and women vibrating through the bone and fiber of the entity. The pulse of the forest surged through the fused nerves, and I was swallowed again, pulled back into the marrow. I looked out through a cluster of wet, unblinking eyes that sat above a wide, human grin. Below me, in the mud of a village square I never truly left, I saw a boy with a high-collared shirt and holes in his back, staring up at me with a scream I could no longer hear. I didn't make it, did I? I never even left. Back at the gas station of Road 232. The bell above the door jangled with that same tinny, rusted scrape that always sets my teeth on edge. I ignored it, focusing instead on the slow drip of the coffee maker and the bitter, burnt scent filling the cramped space behind the counter. Outside, the pre-dawn light was a weak, bruised purple, barely illuminating the government patrol car sitting at the lone pump. "Darn fools," I muttered, my voice a dry rattle. I leaned over and spat a dark stream of tobacco juice into the bucket by my boots, the sound a wet thud in the quiet shop. Those kids and their oversized motorhome had been on my mind more than I cared to admit. Their parents must have finally started rattling cages back in the city to get a patrol out this far, this early. I told them that the old road wasn't for the likes of them, but youth is a special kind of blind. By now, they were likely nothing more than scrap metal and fertilizer for the timber. I wiped a stained rag across the counter and squinted through the grease-filmed window at the officer refueling. They've never been here this early before. Let's see which sheriff they sent to chase yet another cold case this time. I grumbled, grabbing a ceramic mug with a chipped rim. I poured the coffee, watching the black liquid swirl. It was just another Tuesday at the edge of the world. People come, people go, and the forest stays exactly where it's always been, waiting for the next set of tires to wander off the asphalt. I adjusted my cap and stepped toward the door, ready to tell the same lies I'd told the last dozen lawmen who came looking for the lost. The screen door groaned on its rusted hinges as I stepped out into the humid morning air, my heavy boots thudding against the rot-softened wood of the porch. I adjusted my cap, my milky, sightless eye catching the glare of the rising sun, while the other tracked the movement of the man by the pump. It was Sheriff Randy, a man built of hard angles and a stubbornness that usually served him well, but out here, on the edge of the 232, it just made him a target for the things that don't care about badges. "Randy," I rasped, leaning my weight against the doorframe. "You're out here early. Usually, you don't come sniffing around my cold cases until the sun's high enough to bleach the bone." Randy didn't look up from the nozzle as he filled up the cruiser. 3 weeks, Otis. That big green motorhome. For kids. The state police are crawling up my spine because their parents have friends in high places. He finally turned, his eyes narrowing as they swept over my face, looking for the guilt he'd been trying to pin on me for years. He thought I was a murderer, a lonely old hermit who picked off travelers, but he didn't understand that I was just the graveyard's keeper. "I told you the day they passed through," I said, leaning over the rail to spit a dark, tobacco-stained stream into the dirt. They bought their gas, they bought their snacks, and they drove off toward the sunset. I ain't their keeper. The lie tasted like copper in my mouth, but it was a mercy. I had lost my own world to those woods, my Sarah, my life, back when there was a town where that godforsaken rot now festers. I knew what happened all those decades ago when the woods decided to take back the debt from my town. They didn't drive off, Otis, Randy said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. He finished refueling and walked toward the driver's side, but he paused at the back door of the cruiser. One of them came back. My heart did a slow, painful roll in my chest. To my absolute shock, Randy opened the back door, and there she was. It was the girl, Kim. She was huddled in the back seat, wrapped in a coarse wool blanket that looked too heavy for her frail frame. But it wasn't just the cold. She looked like she had forgotten the very mechanics of existing. Her eyes were wide, glassy voids that stared at things I knew weren't in the parking lot. She was trembling with a violent force, her breath coming in shallow, ragged patches as if she were learning how to breathe for the first time and failing the lesson. I walked down the porch steps, my boots crunching on the gravel. I ignored Randy's hand on his holster and leaned toward the open door. "Did you see him?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I spat again, the bitterness of the tobacco the only thing keeping me grounded. "Did you see the keeper, girl? How many did it take?" Kim didn't look at me at first. She just stared at the floor mat of the cruiser, her jaw working as if trying to find a word that had been erased from her mind. When she finally spoke, it wasn't a voice. It was a fractured sound, a junkie's rasp that made the hairs on my neck stand up. "We thought we were fast," she whispered, her hands clawing at the wool blanket. Ben floored it. The smoke was so thick, but we hadn't even gone 600 meters past that clearing. She began to shake harder, a violent flinch accompanying every word. The story spilled out from her memory like a jagged glass shard. They had been on the dirt road, the RV roaring and coughing when the first hit came. It was a massive, trunk-like limb that slammed into the side of the motorhome with the force of an avalanche. The heavy vehicle, which they thought was their ticket out, toppled almost instantly. "I was thrown," she said, her eyes finally flicking toward mine, wide and haunted. The glass shattered, and I went flying down into a steep ditch filled with that black muck. It was cold, so cold. It covered me like a grave, Otis. The mud, it smelled like the well. It hid me. From the bottom of that shallow grave, she had watched the end of the world. She saw the keeper emerge from the trees with that wide, mossy grin that never wavers. It didn't rush. It didn't need to. It reached into the mangled wreckage of the RV like a child reaching into a toy box. "It took Ben," she choked out, a sob finally breaking through the rasp. He was struggling, trying to crawl out of the windshield, and I saw them. Those holes. They were already there at his back. Maybe it was his lack of aspiration, a life lived in a mundane loop, or maybe it was that nagging, deep-seated fear he carried from the loss of his parents, or maybe his unconditional love for his grandparents. Whatever it was, the keeper had tasted it. The holes were a sign that he was already claimed. The monster, it hooked its claws into those weeping holes in his back, Kim continued, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. It didn't just kill him. It began to absorb him. It tore those tiny holes wider, and its own flesh started to fuse with his. It pulled him into its chest, into that horrid, pulsing mass of meat. She stayed in that ditch for 2 whole days, paralyzed by the sight of the forest breathing around her. She watched as the beast's torso began to change. Amidst the tapestry of fused limbs and sightless eyes, a new pair of pale, desperate hands had begun to sprout. They were Ben's hands. She didn't need to recognize them. She just knew it was him, her childhood friend. She watched them clawing frantically at the beast's skin from the inside, for a frantic, hopeless release that would never come. She had crawled the rest of the way to the main gate on her stomach, her fingernails torn to the quick, her mind shattered into 1,000 jagged reflections. Randy slammed the door shut, cutting off the sight of her. He looked at me, his face a mask of grief and confusion. "Otis, what is she talking about? What is the keeper?" I looked away, toward the line of trees where the road 234 disappeared into the haze. The itching in my own sightless eye grew sharp. She's talking about the debt, Randy. The debt that's been owed since Sarah's time. I turned and walked back toward my shop, the sound of the girl's rhythmic sobbing following me like a ghost. I had my coffee, and I had my shotgun, but as I looked at my own hands, I noticed the skin around my knuckles was looking a little gray, a little thin. The forest was a patient landlord, and the harvest was never truly over. Before I stepped back inside, I looked Randy dead in his eyes and told him to let it go. I warned him not to follow that trail down Road 234, to just file it under the usual missing persons cases for that stretch of woods, and the higher-ups wouldn't bother him. Randy started yelling, his face turning a frustrated shade of red as he demanded to know how I knew so much, prying for more details about the keeper, but I didn't give him another word. I pulled the shop door shut, the bell giving one final, tired jingle, and focused on counting the gas money he'd left into the register. Through the glass, I heard the cruiser's engine turn over and the crunch of gravel as he finally headed back toward town. A few months later, a newspaper from the next town over found its way to my counter. There was a small headline near the back: Kim was gone. She had been admitted to an asylum within the week after her rescue, but she had died of uncertain circumstances, though I knew better. The debt has been paid, keeper, I whispered to the empty room, a sharp tinge of heartbreak in my chest as I realized the forest had won once again. Prologue. The aftermath of that cursed road left a trail of wreckage that extended far beyond the tree-line. John's parents, unable to bear the weight of the silence in their home, divorced and moved to separate towns, trying to outrun a grief that had no finish line. Kim's parents stayed, but they were never the same. They lived in a state of suffocating paranoia, sewing GPS trackers into their youngest son's backpack and monitoring his every move, 24 hours a day, as if the forest might reach into the suburbs and snatch him too. Sarah's father, a man who had already lost too much, finally found his end at the bottom of a bottle, drinking himself into an early grave. As for the grandparents Ben had left behind, the grief was a mountain they couldn't climb. With no one left to help them and no hope of the boys' return, they sold off their small shop and disappeared into obscurity, fading out of the town's memory like a flickering candle in a vast, dark wood.